Hello, fellow cyborgs. Today I would like to talk with you about my experience reading In Cold Blood by Truman Capote and also watching two movie adaptations, In Cold Blood of 1967 and Capote of 2005. So as you may have seen in my recent haul video, I picked this up when I was visiting a friend in Australia and I got to it ASAP. The reason why I picked this up was because of Sophie of Portal in the Pages. She recently did a video, which I will link down below, of her top true crime recommendations, and In Cold Blood was her number one, so I was very interested to pick this up upon her recommendation. First, let me tell you what this is about. So, In Cold Blood is a nonfiction novel, I believe is what Capote called it. It details the murders of 4 members of the Clutter family in 1959 in Kansas. This book starts out with you following the last hours that the family spent before they were killed, and also the trip of the killers to the murder site and eventually to the night of the murder. So you see these like two converging timelines switching back and forth and eventually meeting. Then you follow the investigation, the team of investigators, and you also get to hear from the neighbors and townspeople about how this has affected the whole spirit of the town. And you also continue to follow the murderers. You get to follow them as they're fleeing from the police and from the crime and just being on the run. You follow them and learn more about their pasts as children, and eventually you see the investigation out. I'm not going to tell you exactly what happens at the end. We know who killed these people, so they get caught, but I'm not going to tell you how this book ends or anything, because I think that's one of the surprises about what Capote decides to include in this retelling of this murder that happened. I ended up giving this 3 out of 5 stars after I first read it, though upon reflection, I think it probably deserves more stars, but it'll have to wait for a reread to actually earn them. I don't know what I was expecting from In Cold Blood and from true crime as a subgenre, but it wasn't this. I had a real problem with the fact that Truman Capote seemed mostly concerned with diving psychologically and biographically into the two murderers, Perry and Dick, rather than into the investigation process or the victims of the Clutter family massacre. So I thought that about 60% of this book was spent on the killers, about 15 on the victims, and then the remaining 25% on neighbors and the investigators that were investigating these awful murders. For me, that ratio seems a bit sensational. It goes back to the idea that people remember serial killer names but never the victims' names, and that these people whose lives were tragically and violently cut short just disappear from our consciousness, but the people who did this evil or these awful crimes or made these awful accidents happen, they are the ones who are infamously immortalized, and there's something really twisted about that. However, I will talk a bit more when I'm talking about the adaptations, but it seems like that's not the reason why Capote wrote it that way, but at the time I was reading it, it really bothered me. The other thing that I wasn't so keen on was Capote's writing style. It's very unique and very stylistic, but I didn't end up deciding if I actually liked it. He had this tendency to start a sentence and then interrupt himself with a parenthesis with like another long statement and then finish the sentence, to the point where sometimes I forgot how the sentence began and I'd have to look back to see why I cared about this, clause at the end. It was just kind of weird and a little time consuming for me. But again, I have kind of changed my mind about this upon watching some of the adaptations. Overall, when I finished reading this, I definitely felt icky. I was wondering whether or not I should keep this on my shelves because it's just kind of full of bad things. Do you know what I mean? Like if this had a vibe, it would not be a nice vibe, But then I watched the 2 movie adaptations, which I'm going to talk about now, and I changed my mind, and I'm actually not going to be unhauling this. I'm going to be keeping this on my shelves. So let's start with the 1967 close adaptation, which is also called In Cold Blood. I really loved this movie. It's in black and white, and it is a very true adaptation of this book. It follows the pacing of the book, and it follows the sequence of events fairly similarly as in the book. You don't get any like extra information. Some information's cut out in this movie necessarily because it's only a 2-hour movie, but it was a really true adaptation, and I thought it was done so well. The style of suspense is definitely dated, like some of the weird, funky, loud music that's supposed to be creepy is, it's very 60s, but I mean, this is a movie from the 60s, so it should probably feel that way. The two actors who played Dick and Perry, who are the two people who killed the Clutters, they did an excellent job. I thought that they completely suited the characters they were supposed to be playing, or the actors suited the characters, the real life people that they were supposed to be playing. You really got to empathize with Perry especially, which is what you're supposed to do in the book as well. But seeing him and seeing some of the things that he had to go through as a child, I mean, it just worked really, really well. I really love this. For me, I think that this adaptation created in me the responses that the book was supposed to create in me. But because the adaptation is only 2 hours long, whereas it took me hours and hours and hours to read In Cold Blood, and because I am far more used to watching true crime or crime dramas than I am to reading them, that it worked better for me. I thought that the way this was directed was just absolutely excellent as well. In the first opening scenes of the movie, where you're following the Clutter family and you're also following the killers as they converge upon the night of the killing, you had some really amazing transitions between those two places and spaces. It was just really, really cool to watch. I also thought, as far as transitions, that there was this really amazing scene where you get to learn more about Perry and his childhood. There's the scene in the book where Perry and Dick are sharing a hotel room in Mexico, and Dick has brought a woman back to the room and starts having sex with her while Perry is still in the room. I was watching this scene, or the build up to this scene in the movie, and thinking, how are they going to film a sex scene in this 1967 adaptation? Like if they wanted to stay true to the book, how are they going to pull this off? And what they ended up doing, while the sex scene is going on, we follow Perry into his mind and his memories with his promiscuous mother and her drinking and her child neglect. So we see scenes of that whilst the sex is actually happening. So there is no sex scene, but you know that sex is happening in the room, and you get to fill in on the biographical information of Perry. It was just seamlessly done. It was so incredibly effective. I was majorly impressed. I really, really loved this adaptation. I thought it was so incredibly effective. I love how it was made, and I love how it made me feel the things I probably should have been feeling whilst reading the book In Cold Blood. Now moving on to Capote, which is a 2005 film, and it's kind of an adaptation of In Cold Blood. So this is technically an adaptation of a biography of Truman Capote that was written in 1988 by Gerald Clark. And I'm assuming that they truthfully adapted that biography, because I couldn't tell, and I just tried to read the Wikipedia article about like what in here was actually true. So anyway, take what I'm saying with a grain of salt, because I apparently don't actually know what I'm talking about. But Capote, it follows Truman Capote while he's following the Clutter murders so that he can get the information and the research he needs to write In Cold Blood. So this is called Capote for a reason. It is mostly about Truman Capote, though it intersects with the writing of In Cold Blood and the events of In Cold Blood. So in this adaptation, Truman Capote, like I said, is following the investigation, goes to Kansas to talk to people and gather the quotes and the information that he uses to write In Cold Blood, but he also gets intimately, at least this movie suggests, intimately connected with Perry and Dick, but mostly Perry. It's that relationship he has with Perry and the consequences of it, the end of the movie suggests, is why he never wrote another novel and why he ended up having kind of a more miserable life after this experience. This was an absolutely beautiful movie. The music and the colors and the scenes were just so beautiful. I read that this was filmed in Manitoba. My gosh, Manitoba. I just really loved the atmosphere that was in this movie. It was absolutely fantastic. And I said it was a beautiful movie to watch. Philip Seymour Hoffman is obviously amazing in this. He won the Academy Award for Best Actor in 2005, for this role. It was really fun to watch, really engaging, highly entertaining. And it seems like, I hope that he accurately represented Truman Capote, such an interesting individual if that's so. This adaptation also made me appreciate the book a lot more because you get into how Capote wrote it, and there's this one scene where he's reading passages from what he's written so far in Cold Blood to stir up buzz about the book, even though he hasn't finished it yet. And hearing those passages read out loud, it made me think, like, what was I thinking about the writing style not being great before? Because, oh my gosh, those passages. So this adaptation definitely made me rethink my thoughts on why Capote spent so much time on the killers rather than the family, and how he actually wrote it. So it pretty much just made me rethink every single thought I had on the book previously. And that's really good because it made me think I had missed something and that I need to go back to the book at a future date rather than just discounting it as not for me. However, one thing I didn't like is in Capote, Dick is completely and utterly ignored, pretty much. We only get to hear a little bit about Perry's background. And though it's true in the book, we hear a vast deal more about Perry because he's, I guess, the more sympathetic of the two people who killed the Clutters. You get to hear about Dick. You get to see just what kind of psychopath Dick really is. And I think that's really important in understanding the dynamics between the two that caused the murders to happen. In Capote, he's like a non-entity. It was very conspicuous how Dick was being ignored by the narrative of this movie. And while we're speaking about the two, I am not so sure about how they portrayed Perry. He seemed to be different somehow than the Perry in the book In Cold Blood and the Perry in the In Cold Blood movie adaptation. But overall, I would still highly recommend Capote, though obviously this isn't a true adaptation of the book In Cold Blood, and I am really grateful that I saw it because it definitely made me rethink all of the thoughts that I had previously formed on the book In Cold Blood. So for my closing thoughts, I just have to say that I definitely need to give this book another try. And I highly recommend that you watch either or both of those movies, In Cold Blood and Capote. They were both, in my opinion, excellent films. And I really appreciated what they did and how they made me reflect on this book. As far as my experiences with true crime, I think this is my first experience reading a true crime book. And I've read Dead Mountain, which is I think it has the same sort of feeling as true crime, but it's different. I'm not sure if true crime is for me because, like I said, when I was reading this, it just kind of made me feel icky, and it made me think that having this on my shelf is kind of not evil, but very, very bad aspects of humanity would then be sitting on my shelf because of it. And like the darknesses of humanity would be represented on my shelf in the form of this book. So yes, now I'm kind of questioning whether or not true crime is a subgenre I should be pursuing. However, I think that I did learn a lot, and I am really glad that I picked this up and that I read this. So those are my thoughts on true crime, Truman Capote, and In Cold Blood and all of its derivatives. If you have read In Cold Blood, I would love to hear what you thought about it. I know that this is a highly beloved book, and I think I did miss something. So if you have anything you'd like to chat with me about, please do it in the comments below. Until next time, thank you for watching, and continue to be lovely. And of course, thank you, patrons. I hope that you are filling your head with the positiveness, the most positivity of humanity that you can, or if you prefer to dabble on the dark side, that you're doing that successfully, and that you are, as always, having an absolutely wonderful day. And until next time, would be represented. So those are my thoughts on true crime, Truman Capote?